I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, Japan. Where's it all gone wrong as the land of the rising sun dives into recession and a snap election? So can Shinzo Abe win a new mandate to execute his three-arrow plan? Also this week, Indonesia. The price of fuel's going up. It may crimp growth and stoke inflation, but there's a bigger plan afoot. We hear from Indonesia's energy minister. Plus the new Cold War. Al Jazeera America's Ali Velshi takes a look at the economic and energy battles right at the top of the world. Well, they tried it in the US and the UK, and it worked. Quantitative easing, that is. So they tried it too in Japan. But 18 months after the stimulus program known as Abenomics was introduced, the wheels have come off. A key plank has tripped up the economy. And what do you know? Japan's in recession. Now, just as a bit of background, this was the plan, Shinzo Abe's three-arrow attack to fix the economy. It went like this. First of all, Bank of Japan starts buying up bonds. As of November, it was spending $723 billion a year on that. Second, and this was the controversial one, Shinzo Abe increased the sales tax. Now, he was trying to pay off Japan's debt, which is twice the size of the economy, but it kind of backfired. It sent the economy into 2 negative quarters of growth, which is your technical definition of a recession. And the third thing was this, business reforms, or at least attempts at them, ending jobs for life, getting more women into work, but those sorts of things haven't happened yet. What has happened, and this is what's happened elsewhere too, the massive stimulus plan has powered a stock market surge. And according to Bloomberg, the Topix index is up 92%, which means at least investors in Japanese stocks are richer, $1 trillion richer. So something's clearly gone wrong, and it leaves the man who all this is named after in a pretty difficult position. Remember, Shinzo Abe is Japan's 7th prime minister in 6 years, and actually he was already one of those 7 before this current term. Now, he still believes in Abenomics, but has decided to let the people have their say by calling a snap election.
I want to make it clear through the debates during this general election whether economic policies are right or wrong, or if there's no other choice available to us. I will step down if we fail to keep our majority, because that would mean our Abenomics is rejected.
Well, when we want to talk Japan on Counting the Cost, we turn to Sejiro Takeshita in London. He is with Mizuho International. Sejiro-san, thank you for your time. I want to start with Shinzo Abe himself. You know, the fact that he hasn't resigned, I reckon, is actually a pretty good sign, because generally that's what Japanese prime ministers have done for the last 7 years. Instead, he's gone for the snap election. What do you make of that move?
Yeah. Well, I think it just shows his confidence, doesn't it? I mean, right now he has virtually no opposition, and he knows that. The fact of the matter is he's taking a format of asking the public about, delaying the consumption tax increase, which he knows will be quite welcomed by many parts of the economy. And in that sense, it almost shows his confidence that he's going for a snap election, I think. Yeah,
but on that issue of sales tax, Sejiro, I mean, the original level was 8%, and that's not really that bad when you consider other parts of the world where you're looking at, 15, 17, 20% levels.
Absolutely. I mean, the composition of the senior citizens in Japan is almost equivalent to that of Western Europe right now, which, as you just pointed out, VATs are over 20% in many of these areas. The problem with Japan was that they were supposed to be raising these consumption tax, but in the past 15 years, unfortunately, we were in deflationary conditions, and obviously during that state, we could not raise our consumption tax. But at the same time, we have 200% debt to GDP, and we have to be shown to be something. That said, well, 94% of debt are consumed within, so our problem isn't around the corner, but at least we have to be shown to be doing something. So obviously, the government really wanted to raise the tax to 10%, but considering that the fragility of the consumption trend that we're seeing right now, particularly also caused by the bad weather, and also, especially the corporations not really coming back in capital expenditure at full mode, I think resulted in Abe-san and his regime stepping back a bit and waiting for another 18 months. We waited for 15 years. Why not wait for another year and a half?
Okay, fair enough. Let's take a step back further, though, and actually look at Abenomics itself and assess Abenomics. I essentially want your views on what's been successful and what hasn't been.
I'd say, well, I think it's a policy mix, and people only look at the financial aspect of it. And I would say the financial aspect of it is working very nicely, very eloquently, and it's starting to rejuvenate Japanese exporters, particularly causing, which was caused by weakening of the yen. But other policies, including fiscal policies and especially structural reform, that remains to be a question. And it's far, far too early to give any assessment of that. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing very good progress in structural reform. There's a lot of plans that are being announced, but the implementation, and of course, we're not getting any results of it. But that said, of course, Japan is a pretty big ship to turn, especially in structural terms, and it will take years until we see reaping the benefit of those transformational changes, I think.
But isn't it perhaps a bit lopsided? You know, when you talk about the success of it, yeah, it's success for companies and for the stock market. Stock market's doing great. Those people have got all the money. But it's not necessarily going back into the Japanese system. You know, I wonder if it's really helping everyone who it's supposed to.
That's exactly the point that I like to make as well. The fact of the matter is that both the financial policies and the government, you know, a lot of fiscal policies, for example, introduction of governance style, which is very much Anglo-American in my opinion, to please the shareholders, especially the foreign shareholders, is almost brown-nosing in many sense. I mean, of course, in short to mid-run, it does the market good because obviously share price rise is certainly a very good, you know, positive sentiment. It creates wealth factor as well. But does that really rejuvenate the industrial side of Japan? The answer is no. So obviously, we have to go for structural reform. And what we're seeing is possibly, you know, strata division, for example, in consumption trend. And these kind of, you know, societal issues might be coming into phase. And in order to rectify these things, we have to tackle on these structural reforms as strong as we try to tackle on immediate effect from the financial policies. So I think these are the factors that the government should be tackling. But right now, of course, they're too busy looking at, you know, the short-termism stories, which is reflating, for example, the market as you suggested.
What about, Sejiro, economic stimulus? Arguably it has worked in other parts of the world, but again I wonder about with Japan, with things like the ageing population, whether it would work so well. You know, let's not put too fine a point on it. Aging people probably want to hold their money rather than keep it circulating. So how's it working?
That's why they're trying to change a lot of taxation issues and also trying to induce a spending by the elderly, especially in Japan, considering that, you know, lifelong employment seniority system still is pretty much intact. If you look at the composition of savings, you can see suddenly after year 60 it shoots up. This is a positive legacy of, you know, lifelong employment system, seniority system. They tend to have huge savings, but their propensity to spend isn't that high. So obviously, you know, the government has to come up with various policies to induce that. For example, changing inheritance tax, which again will be conducted from 2015, but also to proactively, you know, have these people spend a lot more because that's where the actual, you know, excess amount of cash is. I don't think they've really come up with very good policies in that sense yet. And I think, again, this is one of those wait-and-see attitudes that we have to wait. But more importantly, the senior side, I think what we have to see is more elasticity of spending going up on most of other areas. That is, people that's not necessarily benefiting from, you know, weak yen. For example, a part of the Japanese economy, like exporters, are benefiting. But what about the others? For example, the real income of most of the Japanese have not really risen at all in comparison. Well, of course, we have nominal rates going up. So we have to see those real rates start going up for people to induce into spending mode.
Okay, quick final thought, Sejiro, and we're going to take it out to a regional level here. And I guess I'm talking about the entire Japanese economy here and how it fits into that wider picture. Given all the attention that's been on China recently, you know, APEC was there and it's going to spend trillions of dollars overseas and it's got a development bank. Where does Japan fit into that Asian picture?
Well, the FDI by the Japanese has been rising, obviously, and there is a continuous trend of Japanese going for overseas alliance, M&A, in spite of the weakening of the yen. So that trend, I don't think, will decelerate. It will continue to accelerate. But if you're talking about the regionality, for example, our FDI into China has declined quite considerably, and we're transferring quite a lot of money into Southeast Asian nations, partly because, well, of course, labor prices are rising in China, but a lot of Japanese companies are starting to assess a country risk in China. Again, you know, our economy is very, very hot, but our politics are very cold. And many of the companies are starting to understand the negative consequences of having too heavy, I think, a percentage of weighting in China. Of course, they don't say this verbally, but I can clearly feel that they're feeling the possible threat of their regime.
Sujiro Takashita, always a pleasure to speak to you from London. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And still ahead on Counting the Cost, the new Cold War fought in sub-zero conditions at the top of the world. We'll take you there and show you what's at stake a little later in the programme. Right now, though, Indonesia and a move by this man, President Joko Widodo, which won't be entirely popular. He's bumped up the price of petrol, heavily subsidised petrol, because with oil prices now below $80 a barrel, something has to be done about that heavy burden. Now, Jakarta had planned to spend almost $23 billion on fuel subsidies, which is just over 13% of its budget. But it needs at least $300 billion by the year 2020 to meet its infrastructure needs, that is, roads, airports, power plants and the like. So up go the fuel prices by 30%. It'll now cost 70 cents a litre. And as with any price rise, inflation will also rise, meaning interest rates will probably also rise as well. It will be a shock to the system, no doubt, though I'm sure plenty of you would be thrilled at the prospect of 70 cent a litre petrol. Nevertheless, how is all of this going to play out in Indonesia? Step Varson has more from Jakarta.
Only minutes after the announcement of the fuel price hike, people started queuing at petrol stations across the country. Indonesians are used to one of the lowest fuel prices in the world, and now they worry about rising living costs.
This gives us a headache because our expenses will go up while our profits will stay the same.
Indonesia spends around $20 billion a year on fuel subsidies, something the new government says has dramatically delayed investment in crucial areas.
Say that at least next year there will be a 10 billion US save because of this decision, and it means that there is more room for building infrastructure, education, health, and also the social security.
The low fuel price has also delayed investment in the country's aging oil industry. Indonesia was exporting its oil 20 years ago, but it's now become the world's largest importer of oil. Other sources of energy have barely been explored.
Due to costly fuel subsidies, Indonesia has hardly invested in alternative sources of energy, something that's badly needed if the country wants to keep up with a growing demand for energy and stop depending on oil imports.
To attract much-needed investment, Indonesia wants to simplify regulations and encourage competition with the national oil company. If nothing is done, the government admits the country could face an energy crisis soon.
It is very urgent. Yeah, it's very urgent to start thinking not only depend on the oil. So we should develop other source of energy because we possess a lot of energy resources. But the only problem is we depend a lot on oil.
To those on the streets, what matters most is to make ends meet. But many say with rising fuel and living costs, they are heading for a tough time.
Now, you saw the Energy Minister in that report from Step Varson. Here's her full interview now with Sudirman Said. She started by asking him why Indonesia was making this particular move now.
I would say it will never be perfect time. And I think it's just a leadership call. People in Indonesia and also international market has already waiting for this decision because this shifting subsidy to be more productive is a healthy move. It is important move for the people, and I think because of the bravery of the president, which is willing to take difficult action. Something that is really needed by the people.
Indonesia spends more than $20 billion US a year on fuel subsidies, right? How much is the country going to save?
Minister of Finance said that at least next year there will be a 10 billion US save because of this decision, and it means that there is more room for building infrastructure, education, health, and also the social security, which is if people say that this is not pro-poor policy, I think it is a pro-poor policy.
But when will poor people, for example, feel the first benefits of the money being spent directly to them?
The direct support is coming even these days. So there is no gap because the money is there already. And for the next year, we will also continue support until the next 6 months. And above that, there will be Kartu Sehat, Kartu Cerdas, Kartu Sejahtera.
So these are health policies and education benefits.
It is a special card for access for the health and education.
So for example, like this week, what will a poor family feel? Now, of course, they feel that the fuel price has gone up, so that will really affect them. But how will they be compensated?
I would say there is a two feeling. Number one is psychological feeling, which is as if, of course, there is also real thing that they will have to pay more for transportation. But along the way, there will be cash support coming within this month, and of course there is some time needed to wait for everything is being settled. But I think within 6 months, within 3 months, everything will be settling down, and the Minister of Trade ensure that food supply for the people, I think, is secure enough.
But isn't that too much of a gap? Isn't that the period too long? Because in the past, when the fuel prices were raised, there were violent protests, there were like mass demonstrations. Are you expecting any of that now?
As the President said last night, that we expect a different view, and this is democratic country, so I think people will express the view, and we appreciate that. As long as there is no anarchy, there is no riot or violence. So I appreciate that, and I think the police, the security guard will take care of it, and according to the report, there will be more manageable protests compared to what happened in the past.
Because you were talking about a few weeks, maybe months, right, before poor people will actually feel the benefits. In that period of time, people can get really frustrated, right?
We understand that, we appreciate that, but I think my colleague, Minister of Social Justice, Minister of Education, Minister of Health, working very hard to make sure that the what people needed are served, and hopefully we can see better result.
Something inevitable is also the food prices going up, right? There's an estimated inflation of an extra 2%, right? So inflation in Indonesia will be around 7.3%. What are you going to do to make sure that these prices are not going to hit people too hard?
There is no such policy that make everybody happy, right? And then what we do is calculating the average level of inflation, which is, you just spell out 2%. It creates additional 2 above 5 that we expected. But we also check to the Minister of Finance that it is still manageable rate of inflation. What we are going to do is providing a direct cash support, which we spend significantly above the impact. The calculation says that the direct impact for the poor is about 150,000 a month, but we provide 200,000 a month,
which is around $20.
Yes, about $20. I think this number, if we think about average people, it is quite sufficient, more than sufficient. But there is always anomaly. There is always a big extreme case. So we anticipate that. But I think in general, we can manage the level of inflation.
The popularity of this government and the president is still very high. How much will it affect the popularity, you think, this crucial decision?
I had discussion with the president last night, and he said, this is not about contest of popularity, this is about leadership. And sometimes leaders has to take a difficult decision, although it is at the cost of the popularity. But if we want to focus only on the popularity but deliver nothing, I think it is not leader's call. So I appreciate that even the president said that I will do myself to announce this.
But isn't there still a lack of communication? Because many people still believe that these fuel subsidies are actually benefiting mostly the poor people.
that is the misconception that we have to fight against. Popular perspective or populist perspective say that this is for people, but in fact it is poisoning the people. It trapped us into the comfort zone that cannot move. What we need to do is providing infrastructure for people to have a better purchasing power, prosperity. Then that can be kind of a multiplier for the economic growth.
We often look at Russia on this program and the effects of the tension between it and the West. Frankly, those effects are felt from Europe right up to the Arctic. And it's on the latter which we want to focus. Ali Velshi from Al Jazeera America has been working on a whole series of reports on this new Cold War, as they call it. And we wanted to show you this one on why money is such a driver of tension as well.
It's 10 a.m. on an autumn morning in Transylvania. More than 1,000 Romanian soldiers are engaged in war games. They're under the guidance of hundreds of U.S. Marines.
The smaller MIG-LIT, we call it an APOB.
It's a routine NATO exercise in military readiness.
1 minute!
But demonstrations of force like this have taken on a new urgency for the West. Here, beside the Carpathian Mountains in Romania, these soldiers are training for battle. Just a 7-hour drive from Ukraine, where Russian-backed separatists set off the worst confrontation between Moscow and the West since the end of the Cold War. Romanians and other Eastern Europeans who remember Russia's past aggressions are worried about the West's ability and willingness to stop an emboldened Russian President Vladimir Putin.
A new Cold War is a reality. Now we live in a new Cold War, but it's a danger for the real war.
Not everyone shares the former Romanian president's fears that Moscow and the West are bound for armed conflict. And yet an escalating military presence on both sides has left little room for error. The stakes of this new Cold War are about more than just territory and influence. They're also about money. Here on the top of the world, the battle is being fought over energy. The Arctic is home to 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and 1/3 of its natural gas. To get a first-hand look, I headed north, way north, to the northernmost town in the world, on an island in the high Arctic called Svalbard. Many nations, including Russia, are eyeing this once sleepy coal mining settlement as a strategic base in this new Arctic frontier. But energy isn't the only factor in the battle for the high north. It's also about who controls the high seas, which are increasingly accessible because of global warming.
New shipping lanes created by the melting of ice in the Arctic could save a lot of money. For example, a cargo ship traveling between Western Europe and Asia typically sails through the Suez Canal. Doing it this way through the Arctic shortens that trip by 40%.
Melting ice in the Arctic. It's an ironic contrast to the new freeze in relations between Russia and the West. A freeze that's steadily putting old Cold War enemies on a path toward a new round of battles, whose endgame is less about ideology and more about economic control and financial supremacy.
And finally this week, a lighter note, or is that a higher one? Because the man from Jamaica who brought reggae music to the world is now, more than 30 years after his death, about to promote the other thing he really loved.
We've got a mind of own, so go to...
Yep, the family of music icon Bob Marley is launching the first global brand for cannabis products. They're calling it Marley Natural, things like cannabis-infused lotions, creams and accessories. Because remember, cannabis sales are legal in some countries in Europe and in the Americas. Marley himself smoked cannabis as part of his Rastafarian faith and supported its legalization. And that is our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/programs. The Counting the Cost page is there. It's got individual reports, links, entire episodes for you to catch up on. And down the right-hand side, scrolling right now, is the social media feed, which you can join in with your comments and feedback by tweeting either me at Kamal AJE, our business editor at Abid Oliver Ali, or do use the hashtag Counting the Cost with that, or drop us an email Counting the Cost at aljazeera.net is the address. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.